Warren and I had been married for 15 years, yet his prestigious family had no idea I existed. We had agreed that during the inheritance reading of his father's will, we would finally reveal our marriage to the world. That day, I planned to stand proudly beside my husband as he introduced me to his family. But when I arrived at the imposing Blackwood estate, I discovered Warren had already gone inside, with another woman on his arm, a woman his family had always assumed he would. Mary, the morning had begun with such promise. I carefully selected my outfit, a deep burgundy dress I'd purchased specially for the occasion, modest yet elegant. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. At 67, I had long ago abandoned any pretense of youthful fashion. But I still took pride in my appearance, especially on a day as momentous as this. I styled my silver hair into a neat updo, applied a touch of makeup to soften the lines that had settled into my face over the decades, and fastened the pearl earrings Warren had given me on our 10th anniversary, one of the few gifts he'd been able to give me without raising suspicions. "You look beautiful, Margaret," Warren had said that morning, his eyes crinkling at the corners the way I'd always loved. At 72, he remained handsome, his once black hair now a distinguished silver that matched his steel-gray eyes. "Today's the day. No more hiding, no more secrets." I couldn't help the flutter of anxiety in my chest. "Are you certain, Warren? After all this time?" He took my hands in his thumbs tracing gentle circles on my skin. "Father's gone now. There's nothing stopping us. The terms of the will are clear. I'll receive my share regardless of who I married. It was only Father's approval during his lifetime that could have jeopardized my inheritance." I nodded, not entirely convinced. Warren's father, Cornelius Blackwood, had built an empire in the hospitality industry from nothing, transforming a single struggling hotel into a global chain of luxury resorts. His rags-to-riches story had made him fiercely protective of the family's status. When Warren, his only son, had joined the family business after graduating from an Ivy League university, Cornelius had made his expectations abundantly clear. Warren would marry someone suitable, someone who could enhance the Blackwood name and legacy. I was none of those things. When Warren and I met, I was a widow of 52, working as a historical researcher at the public library in the small coastal town where the Blackwoods kept their summer home. I had a modest background, a teaching degree I'd never fully utilized, and a small house left to me by my late husband. Warren was 57 then, recently divorced from a brief childless marriage in his 30s, and visiting the library to research the area's history for a potential resort location. Our relationship had begun with conversations about local, architectural styles and preservation efforts, followed by coffee at the small cafe across the street, and then dinners at out-of-the-way restaurants where no one would recognize the Blackwood air. Warren was different from any man I'd ever known. Beneath his polished exterior was a gentle soul who quoted poetry and listened intently when I spoke of my passion for local history and my dreams of writing a book about our town's forgotten women pioneers. 6 months after we met, Warren proposed in the rose garden behind my little house. "I love you, Margaret," he'd said, his voice uncharacteristically nervous. "But there's something you should know. My father, he would never approve. If he knew about us, he would cut me off completely." I had started to protest, to tell him I didn't care about his money, but he continued, "It's not just the inheritance. It's the company, the legacy, everything I've worked for my entire life. Thousands of employees depend on the decisions I make. I can't walk away from that responsibility." "What are you saying?" I had asked, my heart sinking. "I'm saying I want to marry you, but it would have to be in secret, at least until my father passes or changes his mind." I should have refused. I should have demanded more. But I had been alone for so long after my first husband died, and Warren filled a void I hadn't realized was there. I told myself it wouldn't be forever, that eventually we would live openly, as husband and wife. And so, we were married in a private ceremony with only the justice of the peace and his secretary as witnesses. Warren kept his penthouse in Boston, where he lived officially, while spending as much time as possible at my small coastal home. To the outside world, we were friendly neighbors at most. When he couldn't come to me, I would occasionally visit him, carefully orchestrated as consultant meetings for the historical preservation aspects of the Blackwood properties. We built a life in the shadows, stolen weekends and hushed phone calls, holiday celebrations either weeks early or late, never on the actual day when his absence would be noticed. Years passed this way, and the temporary arrangement calcified into a way of life. I watched from afar as Warren was photographed at charity galas and business functions, sometimes with a beautiful, society-approved woman on his arm, always someone his father might deem appropriate. "It's just for show," he would assure me after each event. "You're my wife, my only love." I believed him, or perhaps I chose to believe him because the alternative was too painful to consider. In all fairness, he never gave me concrete reason to doubt his fidelity. His devotion seemed genuine in those private moments we shared, in the way his eyes would light up when he walked through my door, in how he remembered every anniversary despite our inability to celebrate properly. We had built routines around our unusual circumstances. Every Sunday when he was in town, we would walk along the beach at dawn, before others were out, holding hands like young lovers. On Wednesday evenings, he would call without fail, no matter where in the world business had taken him. For my birthday each year, flowers would arrive with no card, followed by a visit from Warren days later with the real gift. The years melted away, and somehow I found myself at 67, still living in this half-life, still waiting for the day when I could openly stand beside my husband. Then, 3 weeks ago, Warren's father died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 96. "This changes everything," Warren had said when he called me with the news, his voice thick with a complex mixture of grief and relief. "After the funeral and the will reading, we'll announce our marriage. No more hiding, Margaret, I promise." The funeral had been a grand affair, covered by both business and society pages. I watched it live-streamed on my tablet, a stranger to my husband's grief, unable to stand beside him as he delivered a moving eulogy for his father. I spotted his sister Victoria dabbing at her eyes in the front row, along with her husband and their 3 adult children. Next to them sat Eliza Chamberlain, the woman Cornelius had always hoped Warren would marry, the daughter of his oldest friend and business partner. After the funeral came 2 weeks of agonizing waiting. Warren was consumed with immediate business transitions and funeral arrangements, so our contact was limited to brief, late-night phone calls. "Just a little longer," he kept promising. "Everything will be different after the will reading." And finally, the day arrived. According to plan, we would arrive separately at the Blackwood estate. Warren would go first to meet with the family lawyer and get a preliminary understanding of the will's contents. I would arrive 30 minutes later, and Warren would introduce me to everyone before the formal reading began. I took a taxi to the estate, my heartbeat quickening as we approached the imposing iron gates. The driver had to give my name to the security guard, who checked a list before waving us through. Warren had remembered to add me to the approved visitors, a small detail that nonetheless reassured me. The Blackwood mansion stood at the end of a winding drive lined with ancient oak trees. It was even more impressive up close, a sprawling stone structure that seemed to grow organically from the manicured landscape, its numerous chimneys and gables reaching skyward. I had seen photographs, of course, but they hardly captured the grandeur of the place or the intimidating sense of old money and power it projected. I paid the taxi driver and stood for a moment at the base of the wide stone steps leading to the entrance, gathering my courage. This was the moment 15 years in the making. Tonight, I would finally sleep under the same roof as my husband without pretense or secrecy. The massive oak door opened before I could knock, revealing a butler whose impassive face betrayed no surprise at my arrival, despite the fact that I was surely a stranger to the household. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Mrs. Margaret Peterson?" he inquired politely. I almost corrected him. "It's Mrs. Blackwood, actually," but caught myself. That revelation wasn't for the butler. "Yes, that's me," I confirmed. "Please follow me." The family is gathered in the East Wing library. I followed. Him through a soaring entry hall with a sweeping staircase, past formal rooms filled with priceless artwork and antiques, each space meticulously decorated yet somehow cold, unlived in. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, my sensible heels clicking against the marble floor, the sound echoing off the high ceilings. I smoothed down my dress nervously, suddenly feeling underdressed despite the care I'd taken with my appearance. As we approached a set of double doors at the end of a corridor, I could hear the murmur of voices from within. This was it. After 15 years of shadows, I was stepping into the light. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and nodded to the butler. He opened the doors and announced, "Mrs. Margaret Peterson has arrived." The conversation inside immediately ceased. I stepped forward, my eyes immediately searching for Warren. The library was a magnificent room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, leather furniture arranged in conversational groupings, and tall windows overlooking the manicured gardens. About a dozen people were scattered throughout the space, all turning to look at me with varying degrees of curiosity and confusion. And there was Warren, standing near the massive stone fireplace, but he wasn't alone. His arm was around Eliza Chamberlain's waist, her blonde head tilted toward him intimately, her hand resting on his chest in a gesture of familiar affection. The look of horror that flashed across Warren's face when our eyes met lasted only a second before his expression smoothed into the polished mask I had seen him wear in press photographs, but never directed at me. "Ah, Ms. Peterson," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. "Thank you for coming. Everyone, this is Margaret Peterson, our family's historical preservation consultant. She's done remarkable work documenting the estate's architectural significance for the National Registry." The blood drained from my face as I stood frozen in the doorway. Consultant? After 15 years, after all his promises, I was still nothing more than the historical preservation consultant? A tall, elegantly dressed woman who could only be Warren's sister Victoria approached me, hand extended. "How lovely to meet you, Ms. Peterson. I wasn't aware we had invited consultants to the reading." I couldn't move, couldn't take her hand, couldn't stop staring at Warren and the beautiful woman still tucked against his side. Eliza Chamberlain was perhaps in her early 60s, but looked younger, her face carefully preserved by expensive procedures, her blonde hair artfully highlighted. To disguise any gray, she wore a black designer dress that certainly cost more than 3 months of my pension, accessorized with diamond earrings that caught the light when she turned her head to whisper something in Warren's ear. "There must be some confusion," Warren said smoothly, disentangling himself from Eliza and walking toward me with a professional smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ms. Peterson, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Victoria looked between us, her perfectly shaped eyebrows raised slightly. "The reading is about to begin, Warren. Mr. Farthington is ready to proceed." "It will only take a moment," Warren assured her, placing a firm hand on my elbow and steering me back into the hallway. The butler closed the doors behind us with a discreet click. As soon as we were alone, Warren's facade cracked. "Margaret, what are you doing here now?" he hissed, running a hand through his silver hair. "You were supposed to wait for my call." "What?" I stared at him in disbelief. "You said to come 30 minutes after you arrived. You said today was the day we would finally tell everyone about us." Warren glanced nervously at the closed doors. "There's been a complication." A complication named Eliza Chamberlain? My voice trembled with rage and hurt. You had your arm around her, Warren. She was touching you like she had every right to— Keep your voice down, he warned, looking around the empty hallway. It's not what you think. Then what is it? Because it looks very much like you brought another woman to this meeting, the same meeting where you promised to introduce me as your wife. Warren sighed heavily, suddenly looking every one of his 72 years. The will, it's complicated. Father left specific conditions. What conditions? I demanded. You told me it didn't matter anymore, that you'd receive your inheritance regardless of who you married. He wouldn't meet my eyes. That's what I believed, but it seems Father was more thorough than I anticipated. There's a codicil regarding my marital status. A cold feeling spread through my chest. What kind of codicil? If I'm unmarried, or if I've married someone he would have approved of, specifically, he named Eliza. I inherit control of the company and my full share. But if I've married someone he wouldn't have approved of? Someone like me? I finished flatly. Warren nodded miserably. Then control goes to Victoria and her children. I only receive a minority stake and a much smaller portion of the liquid assets. I stared at him, speechless. After a moment, I managed to ask, So what was your plan exactly? To pretend we're not married? To keep up this charade indefinitely? Just until I can figure something out, he pleaded. The company is at a critical juncture with the Asian expansion. I can't afford to lose control right now. Thousands of jobs are at stake. And what about Eliza? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Why was she draped all over you like you're a couple? Warren had the grace to look uncomfortable. Eliza has always been fond of me. When Father was alive, I maintained a certain appearance of possibility between us. It kept him happy, and it was useful for business relations with her family. And now? Now she believes. That is, I may have led her to think that with Father gone, we might finally— He trailed off at the look on my face. I felt something break inside me. A support beam that had been holding up the careful architecture of lies and compromises I'd built my life around for 15 years. All those nights alone, all those holidays missed, all those times I'd stood in the shadow while he walked in the sun, and nothing had changed. Nothing was going to change. How convenient for you, I said coldly, to have a wife hidden away, for comfort and companionship when it suits you, and a society-approved almost fiancé for business and family functions. Margaret, it's not like that. I love you. You're my wife. He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Am I? Because it seems like I'm still your dirty little secret, Warren. 15 years of my life I've given you, waiting for the day when we could finally live openly. I've missed my chance to travel, to write my book, to build a life that doesn't revolve around your schedule and your father's approval. And for what? So you can continue to string me along while you play house with Eliza Chamberlain. It's not forever, he insisted. Just give me time to sort this out. A year, maybe 2, and I'll have restructured things so Victoria can't take control even if— Even if what, Warren? Even if you admit you've been married to a nobody for 15 years? I shook my head, a lifetime of deferred dreams and swallowed pride rising like bile in my throat. I'm 67 years old. How much more time do you think I have to waste? Before he could answer, the library doors opened, and the same impassive butler appeared. Mr. Blackwood, Mr. Farthington is ready to begin the reading. Warren looked at me pleadingly. We'll discuss this later. Please, Margaret, just go home for now. I'll come to you tonight and explain everything. Go home. After 15 years, that was still his solution. Send me back to my little house by the sea, out of sight and out of mind, while he played the dutiful son even from beyond the grave. How many more nights would I spend alone, waiting for him, to grace me with his presence when it was convenient for him? But as I looked into his familiar gray eyes, now clouded with tension and fear, I realized something important. I still had a choice. 15 years ago, I had chosen this half-life, accepted these terms, believed his promises of someday. But today could be the day I chose differently. I straightened my spine, feeling the weight of my 67 years that had given me, if not wealth or status, then at least wisdom and a hard-won understanding of my own worth. "No, Warren," I said quietly but firmly. "I'm not going anywhere." Warren's face paled as the reality of my decision sank in. For a moment, it seemed he might continue arguing, but the butler cleared his throat discreetly, reminding us of the waiting audience. With a tight nod, Warren composed himself, straightening his silk tie and adjusting his tailored jacket. "Very well," he said in a controlled voice. "Please join us." His tone carried a warning I chose to ignore. I followed him back into the library, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. The room had rearranged itself during our absence. The family members now sat in a semicircle of leather chairs facing an ornate desk, where an elderly man with wire-rimmed glasses, presumably Mr. Farthington, the family lawyer, was arranging documents with meticulous precision. Victoria Blackwood, Warren's younger sister, raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow as we entered. "Is everything all right, Warren? We've been waiting." "Everything's fine," Warren replied smoothly. "Ms. Peterson will be joining us for the reading. Her historical perspective may prove valuable." I noticed Eliza Chamberlain shift uncomfortably in her seat, her manicured fingers toying with the strand of pearls at her neck. She was watching me with unconcealed curiosity, no doubt wondering why a mere consultant warranted such consideration. Chair had been placed slightly apart from the family circle, clearly intended for me. Warren gestured toward it, but I remained standing, every nerve in my body alert. This moment, this precise moment, would determine the course of whatever life I had left. "Before we begin," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "there's something everyone here should know." Warren shot me a pleading look, but I had spent 15 years accommodating his wishes. Not today. My name is not merely Margaret Peterson. While I am indeed a historical consultant, I am also Margaret Blackwood. Warren and I have been married for 15 years. The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria's mouth fell open in an expression of undisguised shock, while her husband gripped the armrests of his chair so tightly his knuckles whitened. Their 3 adult children exchanged bewildered glances. Eliza's face drained of color, her perfectly composed features contorting in confusion and betrayal. Warren closed his eyes briefly, as if hoping that when he opened them again, this would all be a bad dream. When reality persisted, he attempted damage control. "Margaret, this is hardly the time or place. When would be the right time, Warren?" I asked quietly. "After another 15 years?" Mr. Farthington peered at us over his glasses, his weathered face betraying nothing beyond mild interest. "Is this true, Mr. Blackwood? You are currently married to this woman?" Warren's shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly. "Yes," he admitted. "We were married 15 years ago in a private ceremony." Victoria rose from her chair, her tall frame vibrating with indignation. 15 years? All this time while father was still alive, you were secretly married? How could you be so deceitful?" "It's rather obvious why he kept it secret," sneered. Her oldest son, James, a young man in his 30s who had his grandfather's sharp features. Grandfather would never have approved. Eliza had not moved, her face frozen in an expression of humiliation and dawning anger. "Warren," she said carefully, each word precise as cut glass, "all these years, you've let me believe. You've allowed everyone to think that we—" "Eliza, I can explain," Warren started, but she cut him off with a sharp gesture. "You've made me look like a fool," she said, her composure cracking. "Do you know how many times I've had to answer questions about When we would finally make it official? How many wedding venues I've been sent by well-meaning friends. How many designers have approached me about creating a dress for the wedding of the decade. I felt a pang of unexpected sympathy for this woman I had resented for so long. She, too, had been manipulated by Warren, used as a convenient placeholder to maintain appearances. Mr. Farthington cleared his throat. Given this unexpected development, perhaps we should proceed directly to the relevant portion of the will. He lifted a document and began to read. To my son, Warren Cornelius Blackwood, I leave the controlling interest in Blackwood Hospitality, Holdings, along with the family estate and all associated properties, and the sum of $50 million, under the following conditions. If, at the time of my death, he remains unmarried or is married to Eliza Ann Chamberlain, as I have long hoped. The lawyer paused, looking up at Warren over his glasses. There is an alternate provision. Should my son choose to marry contrary to my wishes and sound business judgment, the controlling interest in Blackwood Hospitality Holdings shall pass to my daughter, Victoria Blackwood Montgomery, with Warren. Retaining a 20% share, the estate shall be divided equally between Warren and Victoria, and Warren's liquid inheritance shall be reduced to $10 million. A ripple of reaction passed through the room. Victoria's husband leaned over to whisper something in her ear, a smile spreading across his face. So, because Warren secretly married this library woman, James said, gesturing dismissively toward me. Mother now controls the company and grandfather's fortune is split differently? That appears to be the case. Yes, Mr. Farthington confirmed, returning the document to his stack. Warren's face had gone ashen. There must be some recourse, some way to contest. The will is quite clear, Mr. Blackwood, the lawyer interrupted. Your father was extremely thorough in his legal arrangements. I advised him extensively on this very provision. Victoria was staring at me with new interest. 15 years, she mused aloud. All this time, you've been married to my brother. Yet I've never heard your name mentioned once. The weight of those words hung in the air. I had been so completely erased from Warren's public life that his own sister hadn't known I existed. We kept our relationship private, Warren said stiffly. Private? Or hidden? Victoria pressed. There's a difference, Warren. I stood there, watching 15 years of secrets unravel in minutes. Part of me felt a vindictive satisfaction in seeing Warren finally face consequences for his duplicity, but mostly I felt hollow. The revelation wasn't bringing me the liberation I had imagined for so long. I think, Eliza said, rising from her chair with glacial dignity, that I'll be leaving now. She gathered her designer handbag and walked to the door, pausing only to look directly at Warren. 15 years, Warren. You've wasted 15 years of my life on a charade. Then she turned to me, her expression softening slightly. I didn't know. I hope you believe that. After she left, Victoria turned to her children. James, Rebecca, Peter, would you give us a moment, please? This is a family matter. The three young Blackwoods filed out reluctantly, clearly loath to miss any part of the unfolding drama. When the door closed behind them, Victoria turned to her brother. How could you do this to Father, to the family, to the company? Each question was a separate indictment. Warren's jaw tightened. I loved Father, but his expectations were impossible. He wanted to control every aspect of my life, down to who I could love. Margaret is my choice. A choice you kept hidden, Victoria pointed out. If you were so certain, why the secrecy? Why string Eliza along for years? Why let Father go to his grave believing you would eventually marry her? Warren had no answer for that, at least none he was willing to voice. Victoria turned to me next. And you? What kind of woman agrees to be a secret for 15 years? Were you after the Blackwood money all along, biding your time? The unfairness of the accusation stung. I loved your brother, I said simply. I believed him when he said it would only be temporary, that one day we would live openly. 15 years is a long temporary, Victoria observed dryly. A strange calm settled over me. The nightmare scenario I had always feared, being judged by Warren's family, being seen as a gold digger, was happening. Yet I felt oddly detached from it. Perhaps because after 15 years of living in fear of this moment, the reality was almost a relief. Yes, I agreed. It is. Mr. Farthington coughed delicately. If there are no further questions about the will's provisions, I should continue with the rest of the reading. The remainder of the meeting passed in a blur. There were allocations for the grandchildren, charitable bequests, provisions for longtime staff members. I heard it all as if from underwater, my mind still processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. I had exposed our marriage, and in doing so, had cost Warren control of his family's company and a significant portion of his inheritance. When the reading concluded, Mr. Farthington began distributing copies of relevant documents. Victoria accepted hers with barely concealed satisfaction, while Warren took his copy without looking at it, his expression remote. Congratulations, Victoria, he said tightly. I hope you'll remember that there are thousands of employees whose livelihoods depend on your decisions now. Victoria's smile was thin. I've been working in the company for 25 years, Warren. Unlike you, I didn't spend all my time jetting to glamorous locales and attending galas. I know our employees. I know our operations. Warren flinched at the criticism, and I realized with surprise that Victoria had long harbored resentment toward her brother, perhaps seeing him as the favored child who enjoyed the privileges of the Blackwood name while shouldering fewer of its burdens. Mr. Farthington packed his briefcase and departed with professional discretion, leaving the three of us alone in the library. The tension in the room was palpable. Victoria broke the silence. I assume your wife will be staying at the estate tonight? Warren glanced at me, uncertainty in his eyes. For the first time in our relationship, he seemed genuinely at a loss. We haven't discussed. Yes, I said firmly. I will be staying. As Warren's wife, this is now partly my home as well, according to the will. Victoria's lips pressed into a thin line. Very well. I'll have Simmons prepare a guest room. That won't be necessary, I countered. I'll be staying in Warren's room. A flash of something, respect perhaps, crossed Victoria's face. She nodded once, then left us alone. Warren and I regarded each other across the suddenly vast expanse of the library. The man standing before me looked like a stranger, not the Warren who laughed at my terrible cooking attempts, who read poetry to me on rainy evenings, who knew every sensitive spot on my body. This Warren was a Blackwood first and foremost, a man who had lived a double life for 15 years and might have continued indefinitely if I hadn't forced his hand. I've lost everything, he said finally, his voice hollow. The company, half my inheritance, my father's respect. You still have me? I said quietly. Warren looked at me then, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years. Do I? It was a fair question. The foundations of our marriage had been built on quicksand, his promises, my willingness to believe them. Now that the ground had shifted beneath us, what remained? I don't know, I admitted. That depends on what happens next. Warren moved to the window, gazing out at the manicured grounds of the estate, grounds that were now half mine, according to Cornelius Blackwood's will. The irony wasn't lost on me. By trying to prevent his son from marrying beneath him, the old man had ensured that the woman he would have disapproved of now had a legal claim to his legacy. What do you want, Margaret? Warren asked finally, still looking out the window. 15 years ago, I would have said I wanted only him, only his love. 5 years ago, I might have said I wanted acknowledgement, to be openly recognized as his wife. But now, standing in this house that symbolized everything that had kept us apart, I realized what I truly wanted. "I want to know who we are, Warren," I said. "Not who we've been pretending to be, not the convenient fiction we've constructed. Who are we really, when all the lies are stripped away? Are we even people who would choose each other today if we were meeting for the first time?" He turned to face me, and I saw the weight of regret in his eyes. "I don't know." He echoed my earlier words. "But I think it's time we found out." And in that moment, standing amid the wreckage of secrets long kept, I felt something unexpected. Hope. Not the desperate hope that had sustained me through 15 years of shadows, but something clearer, more honest. Hope that perhaps, in finally bringing our marriage into the light, we might discover if it could truly survive there. That night in the Blackwood mansion was surreal. The bedroom Warren led me to, his childhood suite, was larger than my entire first floor at home. Ornate moldings crowned ceilings that soared overhead, and a massive four-poster bed dominated the space, draped with linens that probably cost more than my monthly pension. "The staff will have unpacked your things," Warren said automatically, then caught himself with a rueful smile. "Though I suppose you didn't bring anything, did you? You weren't planning to stay." "No," I confirmed, running my fingers along the carved edge of an antique dresser. "I expected to be heading back to my little house tonight, either in triumph or in tears." "And which is it?" he asked quietly. I met his gaze in the mirror. "I'm not sure yet." We prepared for bed in uncomfortable silence, the practiced intimacy of 15 years suddenly awkward in these new surroundings. Warren lent me one of his silk pajama tops, and I slipped into the bathroom to change. When I emerged, he was sitting on the edge of the bed, still fully dressed, staring at his phone. "Victoria's called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning," he said without looking up. "She's wasting no time asserting control." I sat beside him, careful to leave space between us. "What will you do?" He set the phone down with deliberate calm. "Attend. Present my case for continuity of leadership. Probably lose." "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. Despite everything, I knew how much the company meant to him. Warren loosened his tie with a sigh. "You have nothing to apologize for. This was my doing, 15 years of deception, of trying to have everything on my terms. And now it's all come crashing down." I wanted to comfort him, to tell him everything would work out, but those platitudes felt hollow after so many years of false promises. Instead, I asked the question that had been haunting me since the reading. "Were you ever going to tell them about us? Truly?" Warren was silent for so long I thought he might not answer. Then, "I don't know." I told myself I was waiting for the right moment, for Father to soften his stance, for the company to be secure enough. But those were excuses. The truth is, I was a coward. His admission hung in the air between us, more honest than anything he'd said in years. "And Eliza?" I pressed, needing to understand the full extent of his deception. "What was she to you?" Warren ran a hand through his silver hair. "A convenient fiction. Father adored her. Our families have been connected for generations, and she was amenable to the arrangement. I never promised her marriage, not explicitly, but I allowed her to believe it was a possibility once Father was gone." "You used her?" I said flatly. "Yes." Warren met my eyes unflinchingly. "Just as I used you in a different way. You deserved a husband who was proud to acknowledge you, who would stand beside you in daylight, not just in the shadows of your little house, by the sea." His words stung because they were true. I had accepted so little, convinced myself it was enough. "Why did you stay with me, Margaret?" he asked suddenly. "All these years, all the broken promises, the birthdays and holidays spent alone. Why didn't you leave?" It was my turn for brutal honesty. "At first I stayed because I loved you and believed in your promises. Then, as the years passed, I stayed because I'd invested so much of myself in our relationship that leaving felt like admitting failure. And finally, I stayed because I was afraid. Afraid of being alone at my age, afraid of starting over, afraid that what we had, incomplete as it was, might be all I would ever have. Warren flinched at my words. I never wanted you to feel that way. What you wanted and what you created were very different things, I replied, surprising myself with my newfound clarity. We went to bed with an ocean of unsaid words between us, lying side by side without touching, both staring at the ceiling. It was the first night we had ever spent in the Blackwood mansion as husband and wife, yet we might as well have been strangers. Morning came with the discreet knock of a maid bringing breakfast. I sat up in bed, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar grandeur surrounding me. Warren was already up, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, his corporate armor intact despite yesterday's upheaval. The board meeting is at 9, he said, checking his watch. I should return by early afternoon. Perhaps we could walk the grounds together then. The gardens are quite beautiful. Such a normal suggestion, as if we were any long-married couple, planning their day. I nodded, and he left with a hesitant kiss on my cheek that felt more like a question than an affirmation. Alone in the vast mansion, I felt like an intruder. I dressed in yesterday's clothes, uncomfortably aware of their inadequacy, in these surroundings and ventured out to explore. The house was a museum of Blackwood history. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors lined the halls, display cases held artifacts of family accomplishments, and every room told the story of wealth accumulated over generations. In the main drawing room, I found Victoria seated at an antique writing desk, sorting through papers. She looked up as I entered, her expression unreadable. "Good morning," I said, determined to be civil despite the tension between us. Victoria set down her pen. "I hope you slept well as could be expected under the circumstances." She gestured to the chair across from her. "Please sit. I think it's time we got to know each other, don't you? After all, you've been my sister-in-law for 15 years. I sat, wary of her sudden interest. "What would you like to know?" "Everything," she said simply, "starting with how you met my brother." So I told her about our first meeting at the library, the research that had brought Warren to town, our cautious friendship that blossomed into something more. I told her about his proposal and his conditions, about our quiet wedding with no family present, about the years of stolen moments and careful deceptions. Victoria listened without interruption, her face revealing nothing. When I finished, she was silent for several moments. "You must have loved him very much," she said finally, "to accept such terms." "I did," I agreed, though I'm now questioning what kind of love allows itself to be hidden away. A hint of respect flickered in her eyes. "And what will you do now that everything is in the open?" It was the question I had been asking myself all night. I don't know yet. For so long, my life has revolved around Warren's schedule, Warren's needs, Warren's secrets. I'm not sure I even know who I am outside of that anymore. Victoria studied me thoughtfully. "You were a historical researcher, you said?" "Yes, before I met Warren. I specialized in local women's history, the forgotten stories of pioneering women who helped build the coastal communities. And you gave that up?" "Not entirely," I said, realizing as I spoke that this was true. I continued my research privately, though I published less frequently. It became difficult to balance with the demands of our unusual arrangement. Victoria reached for a leather portfolio and extracted a business card, sliding it across the desk to me. "Claire Westfield. She's the curator at the Blackwood Family Historical Foundation. We maintain an extensive archive of family and regional history dating back to the 1700s. Perhaps you might find it of interest." I took the card, surprised by the gesture. "Thank you." "Don't mistake this for acceptance," Victoria said crisply. I'm still processing my brother's deception and its implications for our family. But you're here now, and you are, legally at least, a Blackwood. What happens next is up to you and Warren. The sound of voices in the hallway interrupted our conversation. The door opened and Warren entered, his face tight with suppressed emotion. Behind him followed a tall, distinguished-looking man I didn't recognize, and a younger woman clutching a tablet. "Victoria," Warren said stiffly, "the board has called an emergency family council. They're requesting your presence immediately." Victoria rose, straightening her blazer. "What's happened?" "It seems news of our family drama has leaked. The stock is down 12% already, and major clients are calling with concerns about leadership stability." The distinguished man stepped forward. "Mrs. Blackwood," he addressed me directly, surprising me with the formal acknowledgement. "I'm Howard Merrick, General Counsel for Blackwood Hospitality Holdings. Given the unusual circumstances, your presence has also been requested at this meeting." "My presence? Why?" I asked, baffled. "Because," Warren explained, his voice strained, "according to the bylaws established by my father, spouses of major shareholders are entitled to attend family council sessions. That includes you now." An hour later, I found myself seated in the Blackwood corporate boardroom, a sleek, modern space that contrasted sharply with the mansion's old-world opulence. Around the polished table sat the most powerful members of the Blackwood empire, board directors, family representatives, and key executives. All eyes occasionally darted to me, the unexpected variable in their carefully calibrated world. Howard. Merrick stood at the head of the table, his expression grave. "The situation is this. News of the contested inheritance has reached the press. The markets are responding negatively to the uncertainty, and our competitors are already approaching key clients with aggressive offers." "How did this information get out?" Victoria demanded. "We're investigating," Merrick replied. "But the more pressing concern is how we respond." A silver-haired board member leaned forward. "The company needs stability and clear leadership. This family dispute is threatening decades of careful brand building." "There's a simple solution," offered another director. "Warren and Victoria must present a united front. The specific details of ownership can remain private, but publicly, the message must be one of continuity and family harmony." Warren's laugh was short and bitter. "Family harmony? After yesterday?" Victoria shot him a warning look. "Whatever our personal feelings, the company must come first. That's what Father would have expected." I sat silently, observing the dynamics at play. This was Warren's world. Boardrooms and stock prices, power plays disguised as concern for the company's welfare. I felt utterly out of place, yet strangely clear-headed. While they debated market strategies and press releases, I was thinking about the coastal library where I'd spent so many happy hours, about the book on pioneering women I'd abandoned, about the life I might have built if I hadn't subjugated everything to Warren's needs. "Mrs. Blackwood," Merrick addressed me suddenly, pulling me from my thoughts. "You've been quiet. Do you have any input on the matter?" All eyes turned to me, and I realized with startling clarity that they saw me as a threat, the outsider who had disrupted their carefully ordered world. But I was also the one person in the room with nothing to lose, nothing at stake in their corporate games. "I think," I said slowly, finding my voice, "that you're asking the wrong questions. You're concerned with how to spin this situation, how to maintain the appearance of stability. But perhaps the real question is, what kind of company do you want to be? One built on appearances and deception, or one with integrity at its core?" A stunned silence followed my words. "With all due respect, Mrs. Blackwood," a younger executive said condescendingly, "you don't understand the complexities of our industry." "Perhaps not," I conceded, "but I do understand deception. I've lived with it for 15 years. And I can tell you from experience that foundations built on lies eventually crumble. Warren was staring at me, something like recognition dawning in his eyes. Victoria's expression had shifted from irritation to thoughtful consideration. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Merrick asked. "Transparency," I said simply. "Acknowledge the change in leadership. Present it not as a family feud but as a planned transition. Victoria has been with the company for 25 years, correct? Frame her leadership as the natural evolution for Blackwood hospitality." Victoria nodded, slowly. "It could work. The markets respond well to planned succession stories." "And Warren?" asked one of the board members. I looked at my husband, this man I had loved in shadows for so long. In his eyes, I saw a mixture of resignation and relief, as if some burden was lifting even as another descended. "Warren will support the transition fully," I said, making a decision in that moment that would alter both our futures. "And then he will be taking a leave of absence from the company." Warren's head snapped up in surprise. "I will?" "Yes," I said firmly, meeting his gaze across the table. "We both will." 15 years is a long time to live in secret, Warren. I think we need to discover who we are in the light. For a moment, the corporate concerns fell away, and it was just the two of us at a crossroads neither of us had anticipated. Then slowly, Warren nodded. "My wife is right," he said, and I heard the word wife spoken proudly for the first time in 15 years. "I'll support Victoria's leadership and take a temporary leave from operations." The meeting continued. Details were hammered out, press statements drafted, but I was hardly listening. I had made my decision, taken control of my narrative for the first time in years. Whatever came next, whether reconciliation or separation, renewal or ending, it would be on my terms. As we left the boardroom, Warren took my hand, a question in his touch. I didn't pull away, but I didn't tighten my grip either. We stood at the threshold of something new, something undefined. The secrets were exposed, the shadows dispelled. Now we would discover what remained in the unforgiving clarity of day. 3 days after the boardroom confrontation, Warren and I stood on the weathered porch of my seaside cottage. After 15 years of living as his secret, I had insisted we stay at my home rather than one of the Blackwood properties. If we were going to rebuild anything between us, it needed to happen on neutral ground, or rather, on my ground, for once. "It's smaller than I remembered," Warren observed, setting down his expensive leather suitcase beside my worn welcome mat. It had been months since his last visit. He'd always been careful to limit his time here, wary of establishing a pattern that might raise suspicions. "It's exactly the same size it's always been," I replied, unlocking the door. "You're just seeing it differently now." Inside, the cottage welcomed me with its familiar scent of old books and sea air. My home was modest but comfortable. Shelves, overflowing with historical texts, walls decorated with local maritime paintings, furniture chosen for comfort rather than style. There was nothing grand or impressive about it, yet for the first time, I felt no shame in its simplicity as Warren followed me inside. "I've made up the guest room for you," I said, nodding toward the small bedroom off the main hallway. Warren's eyebrows rose in surprise. "We're not sharing a room." "No," I answered simply. "We need to rediscover each other as equals, Warren. That won't happen if we fall back into old patterns." He absorbed this with a slight nod, neither arguing nor expressing disappointment. This new version of Warren, humbled, uncertain, stripped of control, was still a stranger to me. The following days established a cautious rhythm between us. Warren worked remotely in the mornings, managing his reduced responsibilities at Blackwood Hospitality through video calls and emails. I returned to my research, spending hours at the local library and historical society, reconnecting with colleagues who remembered me from before. In the afternoons, we would walk the beach together, our conversations gradually shifting from superficial pleasantries to deeper reflections. It was on one such walk, a week into our stay, that Warren finally broached the subject we'd been circling. "I've been thinking about what you said at the board meeting," he began, his shoes dangling from one hand as he walked barefoot beside me in the damp sand, "about discovering who we are in the light." I waited, watching a trio of sandpipers skitter along the shoreline ahead of us. "I'm not sure I know the answer," he continued. "For so long, I've defined myself by my role in the company, by meeting my father's expectations, by maintaining appearances." He kicked at a small shell. "Without those things, who am I?" The vulnerability in his question touched something in me. "That's what we're here to find out." Warren stopped walking, turning to face the ocean. "I'm afraid of what I might discover." "That. You're not the titan of industry you pretended to be," I suggested gently. "That I'm not worthy of you," he corrected, surprising me. "That when all the trappings are stripped away, the wealth, the family name, the corporate power, there's nothing of value left." I studied his profile against the setting sun, seeing for the first time the insecurity that had driven so much of his behavior. "Your worth was never in those things, Warren. Not to me." "Then what did you see in me?" he asked, genuine confusion in his voice. "Why did you agree to marry me under such restrictive terms?" The question deserved an honest answer. "I saw a man who quoted Wordsworth while examining historic building facades, who spent an entire afternoon helping the library's janitor fix his car, who listened to my passionate ramblings about forgotten female lighthouse keepers with genuine interest." I smiled at the memory. "I saw a person distinct from the Blackwood name, someone with curiosity and kindness that had nothing to do with business empires." Warren's expression softened. "I'd forgotten those days. Somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that the only parts of me that mattered were the ones my father valued. And now? Now I'm trying to remember who I was before I became what was expected of me." That evening, I invited Diane and Patrick, my closest friends in town, for dinner. They had known about my marriage to Warren, but had kept my secret out. Of loyalty. Their shock at seeing him casually setting the table in my kitchen was comical. "So the mysterious husband finally emerges from the shadows," Diane declared, handing me a bottle of wine with one eyebrow raised in silent question. Warren extended his hand to Patrick somewhat awkwardly. "I believe we met briefly years ago, at the Historical Society fundraiser." "You claimed to be Margaret's research colleague at the time," Patrick reminded him with a pointed look. The dinner began stiffly, with Diane and Patrick clearly protective of me, their questions to Warren just shy of interrogation. But as the meal progressed and wine flowed, the atmosphere gradually thawed. By dessert, Warren was sharing stories about the ridiculous lengths he'd gone to maintain our secret, including once pretending to be a plumber when a board member unexpectedly visited his penthouse while I was there. "You should have seen him," I laughed, "in designer clothes trying to convince this man he was there to fix the sink." "In my defense," Warren countered, his eyes crinkling with humor, "he believed me, and even tried to hire me for his own apartment." It was the first time I'd heard Warren laugh genuinely in months, perhaps years. Looking around my small dining table, at friends who had stood by me through everything, at my husband finally visible in my real life, I felt something unfamiliar. Hope. Later that week, I received a call from Claire Westfield, the curator Victoria had mentioned. "Mrs. Blackwood," she began formally, "I understand you have expertise in local women's history." "I did some work in that area, yes," I confirmed cautiously. "Victoria suggested I contact you regarding a collection we've recently acquired." "Personal. Papers from the female relatives of the Blackwood founders, dating back to the 1800s. Most have never been properly catalogued or studied." My interest was immediately piqued. "That sounds fascinating. We're looking for a consultant to evaluate and possibly curate an exhibition," Claire continued. "Victoria thought you might be interested." My first instinct was suspicion. Was this Victoria's way of keeping me occupied, directing my attention away from family matters? But the opportunity itself was undeniably appealing. I'd be happy to take a look, I agreed finally. Though I should be clear that any work I do would be on its merit, not because of my connection to the Blackwood name. Understood, Claire replied crisply. Your reputation as a researcher is what interests us. The family connection is incidental. The following day, Warren and I drove to the Blackwood Historical Foundation, housed in a beautifully restored Victorian building near the coast. Claire met us in the lobby, a tall woman with sharp eyes that assessed me quickly. Mrs. Blackwood will be working in the archives, she informed Warren. You're welcome to use our visitor center while you wait. But Warren shook his head. Actually, I'd like to see these family papers as well, if that's permitted. I know embarrassingly little about the women in my family history. Claire seemed surprised, but led us both to a climate-controlled room where dozens of boxes and leather-bound volumes were arranged on a large table. These just came from the estate attic. No one's examined them thoroughly in generations. For the next few hours, Warren and I lost ourselves in the forgotten voices of Blackwood women. Letters from Elizabeth Blackwood to her sister, describing her husband's ruthless business practices while she secretly funded a home for unwed mothers. Journals from Catherine Blackwood, who managed the family's first hotel during the Civil War while her husband was fighting. Household accounts showing how Marion Blackwood diverted family funds to support the women's suffrage movement. I had no idea, Warren murmured, carefully turning the brittle pages of a diary. All these women, working behind the scenes, shaping the family legacy in ways no one acknowledged. History is full of women whose contributions went unrecorded, I replied, but without bitterness. That's why this work matters. By the time we left, I had agreed to catalog the collection and develop an exhibition proposal. Claire had offered a generous consulting fee, making it clear this was a professional arrangement, not a family favor. In the car driving home, Warren was uncharacteristically quiet. Finally, he said, I've been thinking about the company. I tensed, worried he was reconsidering his leave of absence. What about it? I've spent my entire adult life believing the Blackwood legacy was what mattered most, that preserving the company as my father envisioned it was my primary duty. He tapped his fingers thoughtfully on the steering wheel. But after today, I'm wondering if I've been honoring the wrong legacy. All along. How so? Those women we read about, they didn't just maintain what existed. They expanded it, redirected it, sometimes worked around their husbands to do what they thought was right. He glanced at me briefly. Like you've done, in your way. The comparison startled me. I never thought of it like that. I understand. Now why my father's death felt like both grief and liberation, Warren continued. I've been living in the shadow of his expectations for so long that I forgot to question whether they were right. That night, after Warren had retired to the guest room, I sat on my porch watching the waves in the moonlight. My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria, a formal but not unfriendly message asking how I was settling in with the Foundation's project. We had reached a tentative truce, this sister-in-law I was only now beginning to know. As I typed a reply, another message came through, this one from Eliza Chamberlain. My breath caught. Warren had mentioned she'd been avoiding all contact with the Blackwood family since the inheritance meeting. I hope this isn't unwelcome, her message read. I've been thinking about our brief meeting. Perhaps we have more in common than it first appeared. If you're amenable, I'd appreciate the opportunity to talk. I stared at the phone, considering the unusual request. This woman had been the unwitting third point in our triangle for 15 years. What could we possibly have to say to each other? Yet I found myself curious rather than threatened. I would like that, I typed back. Name, the time and place. As I set the phone down, I realized how much had changed in just a few weeks. From a shadow wife with no voice, I had emerged into a woman making choices on my own terms, professionally, personally, even in deciding to meet my husband's almost fiancé for coffee. Warren appeared in the doorway, a tentative expression on his face. "May I join you?" he asked, gesturing to the empty chair beside me. "Of course." He settled beside me, and we sat in companionable silence, watching the moonlight on the water. After a while, he reached over and took my hand, his touch questioning rather than presumptuous. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "The future," I replied honestly. "For the first time in years, I'm thinking about my future, not ours, not yours, mine." Instead of looking hurt, Warren nodded. "That's good. You should be. And you?" I turned to study his face in the dim light. "What are you thinking about?" "Redemption," he said quietly. "Whether it's possible, whether I deserve it." I squeezed his hand gently, but offered no easy reassurance. Some questions could only be answered through living. "I've scheduled a meeting with my financial advisors tomorrow," Warren continued. "I'd like you to join me if you're willing." "Why?" "Because regardless of what happens between us, you're entitled to security. Half of everything I have is legally yours, but more importantly, you've earned it through years of sacrifice." He met my eyes directly. "No more secrets, Margaret. No more keeping you in the shadows, financially or otherwise." I considered his words, what they represented. Not a solution to all that had gone wrong between us, but perhaps a beginning. "Thank you," I said simply. "I'll be there." As we sat quietly, on the porch of my small cottage, I realized we were both transitioning from a relationship built on inequality and secrecy to something yet undefined. Whether we would emerge as partners in a renewed marriage or as respectful exes finding independent paths remained to be seen. For the first time in 15 years, the future was unwritten, and I held the pen firmly in my own hand. The Glass Kettle Café sat on a promontory overlooking the harbor, its wide windows capturing the dance of sailboats on the water below. I arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a corner table with a clear view of the entrance. Old habits die hard. For 15 years, I had been hypervigilant in public spaces, always watching for anyone who might recognize Warren, report back to his family. Now that secrecy was irrelevant, yet my body remembered the tension. When Eliza Chamberlain entered, several heads turned. She moved with the unconscious grace of wealth and privilege, her blonde hair expertly styled, her casual attire still bearing designer labels. I raised my hand in a small wave and her eyes found mine immediately. "Margaret," she said as she approached, offering her hand. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." We ordered herbal tea for her, black coffee for me, and for a moment, silence stretched between us, two women whose lives had been entwined without either fully knowing it. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she admitted finally. "Curiosity won out," I replied honestly. Eliza smiled, a genuine expression that softened her carefully maintained features. "I can imagine." She wrapped her manicured fingers around her teacup. "I want you to know that I truly had no idea about your marriage. All these years, I thought Warren was simply commitment averse, perhaps traumatized by his brief first marriage. His father kept encouraging me to be patient. And you were, I observed. Very patient." She laughed, a short, self-deprecating sound. "Too patient, it seems. 15 years of my life spent waiting for a man who was already married. It would be tragic if it weren't so absurd." Her candor surprised me. I had expected defensiveness, perhaps even hostility, not this rueful acceptance. "Why did you want to meet?" I asked directly. Eliza set down her cup with deliberate care. "Because I'm tired of being in the dark. The Blackwood family has this extraordinary ability to create elaborate fictions and expect everyone to live within them. Cornelius did it with Warren, Warren did it with both of us, and I suspect Victoria is maintaining her own set of convenient illusions. I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. And you're ready to step out of the fiction? Precisely. She leaned forward. Tell me the truth, Margaret. Not the sanitized version Warren might have given you about us, but what you understand about my relationship with him. The directness of her request caught me off guard, but I owed her honesty. I believe Warren kept you as his public partner, for appearance's sake. You were the woman his father approved of, the one who made business sense. He never intended to marry you, but he allowed everyone, including you, to believe it was a possibility. Eliza absorbed this with remarkable composure. And meanwhile, he had you at home, the wife nobody knew about. Not quite at home, I corrected. We never lived together officially. He maintained his penthouse in Boston, visited me when he could, always with elaborate precautions. Surprise flickered across her face. So it wasn't just me and his family he was deceiving. He kept you hidden away as well. He did. Eliza sat back, processing this information. How did you bear it? The secrecy? The limitations? It was a question I'd been asking myself with increasing frequency. I compromised, I said simply. I told myself it was temporary, that his reasons were valid, that love required sacrifice. And bit by bit, I diminished myself to fit the space. He allowed me. We both did, Eliza said softly. Different spaces, different compromises, but the same essential reduction of ourselves to suit Warren Blackwood's needs. Her insight struck me with its accuracy. Despite our different positions in Warren's life, we had both contorted ourselves to accommodate him. What will you do now? I asked. A spark of something, determination perhaps, lit her eyes. I've purchased controlling interest in Chamberlain Hotels. My father left it to my brother, but he's been mismanaging it for years. The board was quite receptive to my proposal. I smiled, genuinely impressed. Congratulations. Thank you. It's something I should have done years ago, instead of waiting for a marriage that would strengthen the Blackwood-Chamberlain partnership. She took a sip of her tea. And you? Victoria mentioned you're working with the foundation? Yes, cataloging. The personal papers of Blackwood women through the generations. It's fascinating work. And Warren? She asked, her tone carefully neutral. Are you reconciling? The question hung between us, loaded with unspoken complexities. We're finding our way, I answered carefully. 15 years of deception isn't easily overcome. We're trying to understand if what remains between us is strong enough to build upon. Eliza nodded thoughtfully. For what it's worth, I think Warren truly does love you. Even when we were together at functions, there was always a part of him that seemed elsewhere. Reserved. I used to believe it was just his nature, but now I understand he was holding space for you, even when you weren't present. Her generosity in this observation moved me. Thank you for telling me that. As our meeting concluded, Eliza surprised me by suggesting we stay in touch. We've both spent too long in isolation because of the same man, she said. Perhaps it's time we had allies instead of living as unwitting rivals. I agreed, recognizing the wisdom in her words. As I watched her walk confidently back to her car, I realized Eliza Chamberlain was not at all the woman I had imagined and resented for 15 years. She was formidable in her own right, neither victim nor villain in our complicated triangle. That evening, Warren and I had dinner with his sister Victoria and her husband Charles at their vacation home near the coast. The invitation had come, unexpectedly, and I had accepted with some trepidation. My previous interactions with Victoria had been charged with tension and unspoken judgments. Margaret, Victoria greeted me at the door, her handshake firm. That color suits you. I glanced, down at my dark teal dress, surprised by the compliment. Thank you. The home was elegant without being ostentatious. Warm woods, comfortable furnishings, expansive views of the coastline. Family photographs lined the hallway, generations of Blackwoods captured in formal portraits and candid moments. "You're not in any of these," I observed to Warren as we followed our hosts to the terrace. "No," he acknowledged quietly. "I've been an infrequent visitor since Father's health began declining. Victoria maintained the family connections more faithfully than I did." Dinner was a surprisingly pleasant affair. Victoria, while still reserved, made genuine efforts to include me in conversation. Her husband, Charles, a landscape architect with no involvement in the Blackwood business, spoke enthusiastically about local conservation efforts. Warren seemed more relaxed than I had seen him in years, laughing at his brother-in-law's gentle teasing. After dessert, Victoria suggested the men open a bottle of port in the library while she showed me the gardens. I recognized the deliberate attempt to speak privately and followed her into the moonlit landscape. "Claire tells me your work with the archives has been exceptional," Victoria said as we walked along a stone path bordered by lavender. "The materials are extraordinary," I replied. "Your ancestors, the women especially, were remarkable people." Victoria nodded, stopping beside a small reflecting pool. "I've been reading some of the journals you've annotated, Elizabeth Blackwood's, especially. Her observations about her husband's business practices were illuminating." "She was quite clear-eyed about his strengths and failings," I agreed. "As you seem to be about Warren's," Victoria observed. She turned to face me directly. "I owe you an apology, Margaret. I judged you harshly at our first meeting, assuming you had ulterior motives for marrying my brother secretly. Your suspicion was natural under the circumstances. Perhaps, but it wasn't fair. The more I learn about your situation, the more I understand that you were as much a victim of my brother's deception as the rest of us." Victoria's expression softened slightly. "More so, in fact, since you gave up 15 years of your life to accommodate his fears." I wasn't sure how to respond to this unexpected understanding. "Thank you for saying that." Victoria gazed out at the moonlit water. "Our father cast a long shadow. Warren spent his entire life trying to measure up, to be the son Cornelius demanded. I was luckier in some ways. As a daughter, the expectations were different, less crushing. Yet you were the one who actually learned the business from the ground up," I noted. A smile touched Victoria's lips. "Yes. While Warren was the face of the company, attending galas and charming investors, I was in the operational trenches. Father never fully appreciated that. He was too fixed on Warren as his heir apparent." We continued walking, the conversation shifting to the Foundation's upcoming exhibition of the women's archives. As we rounded the corner back toward the house, Victoria paused. "Warren told me about your meeting with Eliza today," she said. "That was brave of you." "It felt necessary," I replied. "For both of us." Victoria studied me with new respect. "You know, for years I resented the women in Warren's life. The parade of socialites Father approved of, Eliza with her perfect pedigree. I thought they represented everything wrong with how our family conducted itself." She offered a small, genuine smile. "I find I don't resent you, Margaret. Quite the opposite." When we rejoined the men in the library, I found Warren engaged in animated conversation with Charles about sustainable building practices for Blackwood's newer properties. He looked up as I entered, his eyes finding mine with a warmth that felt both familiar and new. Later that night, as we drove back to my cottage, Warren was thoughtful. "That went better than I expected." "Your sister is an interesting woman," I said. "I wish I had known her years ago." Warren's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "I kept so many people apart who should have known each other. You and Victoria, you and my friends, even my colleagues. There were many who would have appreciated your historical knowledge." He sighed. "So much lost time." "We can't reclaim the past," I said gently. No, but we can acknowledge it honestly. He glanced at me. How was your meeting with Eliza? I had texted him briefly after the cafe but hadn't shared details. Surprisingly positive. She's resilient, your almost fiancé, and insightful. Warren winced at the descriptor. I owe her a profound apology. Yes, you do. We pulled into the driveway of my cottage, the headlights briefly illuminating the weathered siding and cheerful blue door. In recent weeks, Warren had made small improvements around the property, fixing the loose porch railing, repainting the garden shed, tasks he'd never had time for during his brief clandestine visits over the years. Inside, a familiar comfort enveloped us. The cottage felt different somehow, with Warren's presence no longer a secret, no longer temporary. His reading glasses lay on the coffee table beside a maritime history volume. His jacket hung beside mine on the rack. Small signs of a shared life emerging from the shadows. I've been thinking, Warren said as he turned on the kettle for our nightly tea ritual, about what happens next for us. My pulse quickened. And? He leaned against the counter, his silver hair catching the soft kitchen light. I've lived my entire adult life according to my father's blueprint. Even our marriage, with all its secrecy and limitations, was shaped by my fear of disappointing him. Warren's expression was open, vulnerable. I'd like the chance to discover what our marriage might look like if we built it ourselves, according to our own designs. What are you proposing exactly? I asked, needing clarity after years of ambiguity. A renewal, he said simply. Not picking up where we left off, but starting something new. Being public about our relationship, yes, but more importantly, being honest with each other about what we truly want. He moved closer, taking my hands in his. I'd like to court you, properly, Margaret. No shadows, no constraints. Just two people seeing if they still choose each other. After everything. The offer hung between us, sincere and unexpected. Not a continuation of our compromised past, but a possibility of something healthier, more equal. I'd like that, I said, finally. Though I think we both have individual healing to do as well. Warren nodded. Agreed. You've rediscovered your professional passion with the Archives project. I'm finding purpose in the education foundation I'm establishing with part of my inheritance. His thumbs traced gentle circles on my palms. We build our separate strengths, and together, we discover if we're still stronger as partners. I leaned forward, resting my forehead against his, an intimacy more meaningful than any passionate embrace. I'd like to introduce you to the local historical society next week, I said, as my husband. No more hiding. His smile was like sunrise breaking through clouds. I'd be honored. Later, sitting on the porch with our tea, watching stars emerge over the ocean, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past month. From a shadow wife to a woman claiming her place in the world. From a marriage built on secrecy to the possibility of a relationship founded on truth. Warren had retreated to the guest room, respecting the boundaries I'd established as we navigated this new territory. But tonight, looking at the man beside me, humbled by consequence, yet striving for growth, I felt the first stirrings of a love that was chosen rather than compromised. What are you thinking? Warren asked, noticing my contemplation. I smiled, watching the moonlight dance on the waves. I'm thinking that at 67 I'm finally learning who I am when I'm not hiding. And I'm curious to discover who we might be together when we're both standing in the light. Warren reached over, his hand finding mine in the darkness. Not claiming, not presuming, but offering. And I, with the wisdom of years and the courage of new beginnings, chose to accept. Our story wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. Not the fairy tale of wealth and privilege I had once imagined, nor the shadowed half-life I had accepted for so long, but something real and imperfect and entirely our own. At the inheritance meeting that had changed everything, I had emerged from 15 years of shadows. Now, in the quiet evening of my own home, I was stepping fully into the light, not as Warren Blackwood's secret wife, but as Margaret, a woman reclaiming her name, her voice, and her rightful place in the world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.